Welcome to America's Fractured Politics. Today I'm happy to have with me here Heather Melton Fox. Heather has held roles as a senior communications and strategy advisor in the U.S. Congress in nonprofit and philanthropic organizations and is the founder of her own consulting firm. She writes Mindful Resistance on Substack, where she explores how we can cut through the chaos driving confusion and division in our politics so that we can make positive change to everything from our political conversations to the structures that are keeping us stuck. So, Heather, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you here. Let's start out with a general question.
Yeah.
Today, I just found out from ABC News that Trump is planning on keeping his UFC structure on the White House lawn permanent.
Yeah.
What do you think it's going to take to undo the damage done by Trump, and what are the priorities once the Democrats take over, which I believe they will?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think my answer is that there's not just one thing. There are a million different things we're going to have to do in concert. And I think hopefully our conversation unpacks some of that. In the most immediate term, it seems as though what we need to do is protect the elections in the midterm. And I am encouraged a little bit by what's happening in the courts. That whereas, while the Supreme Court has not made me categorically happy at all times, to say the least, I do think some of the lower courts are doing interesting, important work to overturn for some of the deportation stuff.
Yeah.
With even the slush fund and so on. So I think it's going to take a lot of things. How about you? What do you think?
I think one of the first things that has to be done is to deal with the deportation mess, to basically release these people and hire some immigration judges and have these asylum cases go through in order.
Yeah.
And close down these facilities, which are for-profit prisons as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
The next thing is to do something about the Supreme Court. I believe that we ought to expand it to 13 justices, one for every federal circuit, have retroactive term limits to knock out a lot of these justices, even if some Democrats have to go, and then appoint new justices.
Yeah.
And I think we've got to play hardball that way because it's, as far as I'm concerned, we get nowhere unless we deal with the Supreme Court.
Yeah. I mean, what is the mechanism to do that?
It would take a president in both houses of Congress to enact it into a law.
And what majorities in each house?
Just simple majorities.
Okay.
If the Democrats kill the filibuster.
Right. Okay.
If they don't kill the filibuster, it won't happen. So that's the other thing I should have mentioned. They've got to kill the filibuster.
Yeah.
So that they can get through all of these things.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're pointing to something that is what I try to explore more broadly, which is I think those are important things. They have to happen in concert with all kinds of other things, with will building in the country, with how we communicate with one another, with how we're breaking through our kind of algorithmically created realities. So playing hardball, kind of going to one of the other things I know we're going to talk about is my favorite quote of Barney Frank's, that you owe it to your idealism to be as pragmatic as possible. What is the strategy that you build underneath that goal? And I think that takes all of us doing our part in different ways.
I think it does. I think it's going to be a collective effort, and I think it's going to take a real national will.
Yeah.
And I think people are disgusted enough where I think they will take action.
Yeah.
But we'll see what they do in November. Another question. Your Substack. Talk about the Substack itself, what issues you address, what informs your work, what inspires you. You wrote the following. When political power claims the authority to define both faith and belonging, it decides who counts and who doesn't. A religion that has been a beacon of mercy for countless souls should not be used as an authoritarian slogan that normalizes cruelty and entrenches privilege. A politics that requires that kind of exclusion is not one that can be trusted with power. Elaborate on that a bit.
Yeah. So just to kind of uncouple two things there. More generally, what I'm trying to accomplish with mindful resistance, maybe I'll illustrate with just a couple of quick stories that I also write about in one of my earlier posts last year. I talk about how I was on the beach in Mexico with my family a few years ago, and someone in the hotel down the next hotel over collapses, and everybody starts running and screaming and yelling, and it's just total pandemonium. And my younger brother is a firefighter. So while everybody else is kind of registering what's happening, he's making his way there at this very steady clip. And he's not running, he's just kind of deliberately moving toward the problem. And afterward, I asked him about that, and he explained that firefighters are trained to do what they call a gutter check. That, if you are moving too fast without knowing it, you get blinders on. And you could also arrive at this chaos having already exhausted yourself. So I think about that in terms of how are we looking at this problem and how are we moving deliberately toward it? And also, who are we as individuals in that scene? Are
Mhm.
you the person waving your arms? Are you the person screaming? Are you the person over on the side gossiping about it and really not contributing anything? And so that requires some sort of reflection in that way. And then the other thing that I think about is another story that I talk about, which is this wonderful, wonderful, beautiful Buddhist teacher, Joan Halifax, who happens to be an American in Santa Fe, who's done just really wonderful work all over the world. She talks about one time being at an outpost in Nepal, this medical outpost in the middle of nowhere, and this man shows up with his daughter who'd been badly burnt, and he'd been walking with this little girl for days, and she shows up and they take off these dirty bandages, and apologies for how gross this is, but there's maggots in the wound, and she is looking at this, and she mostly wants to stay, more than anything, she wants to stay with the suffering of this child, but she finds herself getting overwhelmed. She thinks she's going to pass out, so she decides she will focus on the bravery of that child and the people that are working to save her life. And I think there's so much in that that's instructive as well, that where are we putting our focus? That this is such a precarious moment. Are
Yeah.
we, looking at what is productive and helpful and who is actually being harmed, or not to be too cute about it, are we the maggots in this story?
Right.
So I think about those two things as kind of a framing mechanism. Mostly I write this because it's things that I'm trying to work out. I'm trying to figure out how to not get overwhelmed and pulled under by the chaos or despondent, and all of those things. And so to your second part of that question, you're referencing the latest thing that I wrote, which is called MAGA Needs to Stop Making Jesus Sound Like a Jerk. And the point of
I
that,
loved it. I thought it was great.
thank you. But it, the point of that piece is something, it's a good example because it's something that I've been trying to work through, is as we see this sort of overt, really unapologetic Christian nationalism in the White House and throughout the kind of supplicants propping up the president. I listen to lots of different kinds of people talk about how they feel about that. And I think it is just so important that we are mindful about how we are framing a conversation and drawing a contrast. People like me have an inclination toward framing around the separation of church and state, or this is when they claim it's a Christian country, we argue with that, sort of on this historical constitutional grounds, and that's fine. But I don't actually think that's the point. I think the point is that they are claiming for themselves something that they should not be claiming for themselves. In the same way Trump thinks that this is his country, Jesus does not belong to Pete Hegseth. And you know, it makes us have to think about the ways in which we are using our symbols, the ways in which, we're talking about our Constitution or our flag or what it means to be a patriot, and to not just cede that ground out of the gate. Do you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. It's something I've spent some time thinking about too. We, we tend to we tend to sometimes belittle religious people,
Right,
and I think that that costs us votes because there are a lot of people of faith in the Democratic Party, especially among centrists, and you chase them away when you become all-encompassing in your criticism of religion.
right,
There's a need to respect their faith and incorporate it into your dialogue. Just as it's important to, bridge the gap between rural and urban
right.
people. You can't leave votes on the table. And the only way you can do that is by respecting people and listening to them.
Yeah, and in an authentic way, and looking for where we have common ground and common purpose. Because I do believe, and it's one of the things that I try to unpack in that piece, is that we have a very strong tradition of Christian morality in this country. And I use the example of uh, Abraham Lincoln talking about how he tried to navigate the burden of leadership with a nation at war and a country deeply divided. And he has this beautiful quote that's something along the lines of, "I've been driven many times upon my knees by the deep conviction that I had nowhere else to go." That's so gorgeous to me. And then you contrast that against this president who, when asked who he looks to for advice, he says himself, because, quote, he has a very good brain, you know, or you look at my personal hero, the hero, may possibly one of our greatest Americans, definitely one of our greatest, possibly our greatest, John Lewis,
Yep.
whose entire, you know, his commitment to the Christian values of mercy and justice and the dignity of every human being animated his work in the civil rights movement, and so you contrast that against Pete Hegseth, who I know you read, is continues to deny certain people promotions that they're due because they are a black or a woman, and he just
Okay.
says gay, a trans, whatever it is, that it is a cause to be celebrated. He said this in an event earlier this year where he said that he was happy to report that the godless diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts are dead. And I think that using, for all of us, Jesus has been this symbol of selflessness and care for one another. And using history's highest example of self-emptying love as a shield for this bottomless grift and shameless cruelty is not something we can just cede that territory. And I think that, to the other point that you made, I personally do find it condescending the way that Democrats sometimes talk about people of faith. It does not make you stupid. It does not make you ignorant. We all have belief systems that organize our lives, whether it's, a secular moral tradition or a religion or something else. And if we don't try to figure out what we have in common and, what is our common purpose, what are our common values, then we're not headed in a good direction. Mm,
No, we're not.
mm,
Speaking of John Lewis, I got to know him a long time ago, and I've seen him a number of
right.
times. I saw him a number of times before he passed away. The thing about John Lewis that struck me most is his humility.
Mm,
He was one of the most humble
yeah.
people I know
Well,
with
think
the
about
least
that.
reason to be humble.
I was thinking about that just this morning,
He was remarkable.
because I think about that iconic picture on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And you, of course, know they wanted to rename that the John Lewis Bridge. And he said no. he said that it was a
Hmm.
symbol of the civil rights movement. It shouldn't be named for him.
Yes.
Stack that against the current occupant of the White House, who wants to slap his name on everything. And, you know, I think that's what I mean by framing an issue and drawing a
Everything.
contrast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's a contrast. Um, let's talk about the rot at the core of the DNC. Personally, I see them as a major
Yeah,
obstacle to our
I
success
know
because of their
that you've
dependence
said
on
that, and
corporate
I
and
was
special interest money.
interested in
What do you
hearing more
think?
about that because I think it doesn't matter where their money comes from, they are a disaster. If they only had small donor donations, they would still be a disaster. Yeah, yeah, right,
They'd still be a disaster. I agree. It's just the way it's set up. But I think the corporate and the special interest donations are a big problem
right.
because they tend to mute
Yeah.
the genuine feelings of members. I mean, I've had
Mm.
members tell me in private things that they don't say in public, and they won't say them
And so
because
is
they're
that,
afraid of their donors.
I'm guessing, more
And to me, that's
progressive
that's a warped
voices,
system. That
or
doesn't
what are the
work.
kinds of things that they want to say that they can't in a general sense? Mm.
They 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 don't want to criticize big business. They don't want to criticize the banks, the insurance companies, the oil
Yeah,
companies. They mute their criticism in really squishy words
yeah,
that don't really have any meaning. There's nobody that's willing to come out there like the progressives and say it as it is. And so the fact that they won't do that and they have control of the party means the party is going to be eternally divided between a section that wants to address social change head on and another that
right,
wants to take it easy and slow, which means to the progressives, never again, never, that'll never happen. And until they find a way to bridge that gap,
yeah,
it's going to be very difficult to make the kind of progress that people like AOC and Bernie and others want to make. That isn't to say that they have all of the
right,
answers, but framed in the proper perspective, people want universal health care in some form. People want climate change activity. They want um, they want better health care in general. They want a decent living wage. All of those things are things that the progressives want.
yeah,
But the way they're framed is important because centrists tend to not like the framing that we've used in the past.
yeah,
Instead of saying Medicare for all, say good health care for everybody or something like that. It's just the way you frame it. But it's
right.
very hard to even
Well,
use
and I
that
think you make a
framing with
good
some of
point.
the centrists because they're
They are
afraid to
still
alienate their
it.
donors.
The money is one part of it. The other part of it that makes me bananas is that they are so bad at communications and bad at what they're doing for the reasons maybe that you're talking about related to that for sure.
Hmm.
But there is this old way of doing things that's grounded in big donors who pay high paid consultants to run campaigns that are kind of based in traditional endorsements, traditional media buys. Even I'm sure you saw the autopsy debacle with Ken Martin and all of that. And if you, yeah, did you, I mean, if you saw that interview that he did with, was it John Favreau?
Don't get me started.
It's, it's a disaster. It's a disaster. You're watching this person try to
Yeah, it was
employ these
disaster. It was
tactics
a
like he's
disaster.
talking to Tim Russert 30 years ago, and he can just keep repeating the same three things, except it's not a 2 minute segment. It's an hour-long conversation. And the part he doesn't have an hour to fill, and the gatekeepers are gone. You know, whatever
And
he
he doesn't
thinks
have an hour
about
to
that,
fill.
whatever anyone thinks about that, that is reality. And they're playing this game, you know, I don't, I, it they cannot, you always hear this, it's a hard job. And I agree, it is a hard job. That's why you should be good at it. And they are not, right? And you look at the people that are good at it, it is people like AOC, you know, it is people that know how to communicate in this environment, people that know how to frame an issue and draw a contrast. And I was actually thinking about that in the context of Barney Frank's passing, because, he wrote that, or not wrote, he was interviewed by the New York Times. Did you see that? Yeah. And I thought I had this, and I had great admiration for him, and I still
I
do.
read it. I read it.
But he's talking about how he supported Janet Mills in Maine and encouraged her to run, how the Democratic Party lost its way when it started talking about these race and cultural issues and not economic populism. And that, to what you just said, that we need to be incrementalists, we need to take these steps. And I thought, not to take anything away from this person that I think has contributed a great deal to the country, but I suspect that if he were a younger man, or if he lived for another 10 years, he would realize that the way that he wants to do business, this DNC way of doing business, is no longer pragmatic for reaching the goals that we say we want to reach. You know? Yeah. Mm,
That interview shocked me because I've known Barney Frank for years, and that's not
right.
the Barney Frank I knew. He didn't sound anything like the Barney Frank I knew. Barney Frank was a firebrand.
Mm.
Barney Frank wanted to do things differently. Barney Frank wanted to talk about the issues that mattered.
What do you think?
And the
What
Barney
would be
Frank
a
I saw in
guess?
that interview was a completely different person.
Wow.
And I'm not sure what happened. I don't even have a guess. I don't know. I don't have a guess because it's such a switch that
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know why he'd promote Janet Mills. She's nearly 80 years old. She's not in touch with the voters of
Right.
Maine. Graham Plattner,
Yeah.
with all his faults, knows what people are thinking and wanting, and he's got a finger on the pulse. So, like him or not, I suspect the next round of polls is going to show he may have lost maybe a bit of support, but he's
Yeah.
still 9 points out of Susan
Yeah. I don't
Collins.
know.
Now, she always finds a way to pull it out,
Mm.
but I don't think she will this time
What do you think is at the base of the anger?
because the anger is so deep. People are broke.
Right.
People are scared. People don't have futures. Young people can't buy houses. Young people can't find jobs. The elderly are afraid for their Social Security. They see that the country's
Yeah.
divided and everybody hates everybody else.
Right.
And it just paints the picture of a country that's completely off its rocker. And that scares people.
Yes.
And I think they're getting angry because they feel like the politicians who they've elected have failed them.
Right.
Some of them have, a lot of them have, a lot of them have, some of them haven't. But everybody gets thrown into the pot together. And that's why you might see a wipeout.
Maybe. I mean, that's where I think.
And I think the Democrats will benefit from it because
Yeah.
they're not Trump. They
It'll
need to
take them
articulate a vision,
away,
to be
and
sure.
it should.
But the fact that they're not
He's a
Trump will take them
disaster.
away.
There's never been anything this corrupt, and I do think that his promises to do things to help with the economy,
Yeah.
to not get us into wars and so forth, I think people feel betrayed by that. But I don't think we can take for granted what different sort of algorithmic realities we're living in. And I worry that sometimes we can kind of breathlessly
can.
agree with each other and not make sure that we understand what they're saying on that side. So the way that you articulated the problem, I think it's the way that everybody across the country feels, regardless of a political um, party. So how are we going to be the ones
Yeah. They do.
that convince people to give us a chance to lead us out of it?
On that score, um, a lot of
Yeah,
people are ashamed of
I'm not
America.
ashamed of
You're not.
America. This
Talk about how you
president
feel
is
about
not
that.
America. He is the head of one of three co-equal branches of government, and he's been loaned that privilege for a finite amount of time. The Constitution of this country, it created the separation of powers. for the explicit purpose of guarding against the autocratic impulses of a wannabe king, because they anticipated that something like that might happen, and it is happening. So for me, I have concern, I have disappointment, I have fear, but I don't have time for shame. I don't find it to be a terribly useful emotion. For me, it's very heavy. It's, if it makes you move at all, it's to hang your head and hide. And I need to make sure that I'm doing whatever I need to do to stay engaged with the problem. I don't think shame helps people do that. But what do you think? I mean, do you think people feel, yeah,
No, it doesn't.
hmm,
I, I'm not ashamed of America. I'm not at all ashamed of America. I'm ashamed of what we've become under Trump. But I believe that the American people still have a will to elect leaders who will do the right thing. I just think they're so jaded right now that it's
yeah,
hard to get to that. But I think if you see some good government for a little
mm,
while and the Democrats can deliver, I think you'll see a different populace in a different mood and a different sense of being. Um, right now, America looks embarrassing because of Donald Trump,
yeah,
and he tends, because he's so large, so larger than life, to define the country. I mean, he's got the whole world thinking that we're hopeless. And the fact is, 78 million people voted for him. So if I'm the Europeans, I look at that and say,
yeah.
that's a lot of people. What tells us that he won't come around again in some form, some other form? Because there's a large subset of people
I
that
worry
like this
about that
sort of
too.
thing. So how can
Yeah,
we count
I
on
worry
America?
about that too.
That's what
I'm
I
sorry, go
worry
ahead.
about in terms of embarrassment.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
that Trump's embarrassing,
right,
and he's embarrassed us around the
right.
world. Should we be
And
embarrassed
I
for
will
ourselves?
say, I
No, because
have
we're not
the
Trump,
opportunity to
and
do
Trump is not
quite a bit
us.
of traveling around the world. And what I have found in conversations with people about Trump, they're baffled by it in the same way that I am to some extent, working intentionally to be less baffled and understand it more. But other places have gone through the rise of autocrats. They've gone through these kinds of things before. They also understand, in my conversations with people, we are not as unique as we think we are in the world in dealing with immigration from the global south, in dealing with, right, there's any number of issues, economic populism, any
And
number
we're
of
not.
things are happening all over the world. Look at France, right? Yeah. And I think that
Look at France. Look at
where I
France.
land is what is different is that we have been the leader of the free world, and people have looked to us to be a force for good. That doesn't mean that we haven't done things wrong, things that we should regret and amend, and any number of things. It doesn't mean that this is a perfect place, but it has been a place that people could generally count on to keep their word in, foreign relations, to keep their word on trade agreements, and to be on the right side of things generally, and now it doesn't seem, the notion even just a few years ago that we would be essentially on Russia's side against a sovereign nation that had invaded. It's just, the mind boggles at it. And here at home, I mean, we're always a work in progress. We're always trying to work toward a more perfect union. So I do try to pause and say, when I hear people say that they're ashamed of the country, there's a part of me that says, why now? We're almost 250 years into this thing. There have been many times when we have not met the expectations of our citizens. And, this isn't the first time. It's the first time in my lifetime it's been this bad. But there's been times throughout this country's history where we've had to rise up and do better by each other. So, that's where I just try to keep my focus.
which is a good focus. Um, Going back to the issue we talked about before, I just want to probe a little bit more. How do you how do you think we individually contribute to both the chaos we say we hate and the
Yeah, I
disconnection
mean,
people feel
to
toward
me, it's
politics and one
something that I'm
another? We
actually
touched on
really
this
trying to
before,
work through
but I'd like to dig a
myself.
little bit deeper.
I think that I think about it. I have a lot of energy for this kind of thing. I have lots of energy for politics and information and trying to figure things out. And one of the things that I've been trying to do is when I'm consuming social media, I try to keep this in mind. I read this statistic that 80% of people that are consuming social media are just scrolling. They don't like anything. They don't share anything. They definitely don't post anything. The other 20% that are posting are generally people who are articulating the most extreme version of an argument. So those 20% are making the 80% think that that's what everybody thinks. And so I, when I try to engage, because I find myself getting upset, there's
Yeah.
urgency, everything's a mess. One of the things I've started trying to do, yeah, on Substack, where we both write, though you much more successfully than me, but the I'm looking through something and I try to say,
Oh, I don't
what
think
is
so.
this communication? Is this somebody venting? Is this somebody signaling, that I'm going to defend you? Is this somebody trying to educate someone? Is it somebody trying to persuade? Is it somebody trying to test out a belief? And that helps me a lot in how just framing, what am I looking at here? Because I think sometimes we treat everything like everything, that somebody might just be venting, that they're so frustrated that this guy's such a clown. That is not a
Hmm.
policy solution, but it's not totally useless. If somebody's trying to actually teach something or share information, that's different than this and that. So I try to, for myself, I try to think about, what am I getting from this? If it's just furious, that has a limited amount of value for me, you know. Um, and then I go back to, what is the purpose of engaging with this? Because lots of times, if I look at the news for 5 minutes in the morning or a half hour in the morning and a half an hour at night, I know as much as if I look at it every moment, 24 hours a day, because it's just things on repeat, trying to keep everything as, yeah, yeah. And that is not good for us. And
Yeah.
I think one of the most
They just repeat it on a loop. Yeah.
pressing things that we can do is we're experiencing this world so much through pixels on a screen. And we're experiencing it again in these like algorithmically driven, separate, but kind of equally
Hmm.
compelling realities that feel really disconnected from what it's like when I turn off my phone. It's so much information to process. It's so much to try to figure out. And I think we don't know how to bridge that gap. So it doesn't make sense to me, if you are only to rely on what you're reading, depending on what you consume, you're being made to believe that 80 million people are as rotten as Donald Trump. And I don't believe that. I just don't. And I think there's nothing that is more beneficial to him and the MAGA movement than to make people believe it is that strong and that large. I don't believe that it is. So I try to have conversations with people that don't see things the same way that I do. I have a high tolerance for it. Like you, I worked in Congress, so I have some skill in dealing with people that I don't agree with, telling me what they think in intense ways and being able to hold that. And I find it really helpful. It's what makes me know that when you articulate the problem that you did, that's what everybody thinks. That's not just what Democrats think. That's what everybody thinks is the problem that we need to solve.
Yeah. Um, What have been your encounters? What have
Yeah,
been
I mean,
like?
it depends on the
What's it been like to
person,
encounter
but I
Trump
mean,
supporters?
I
What
would
have you
talk
found
about,
the dialogue to be like?
uh, I'll send him this podcast when it comes out. But one of my neighbors is this young guy, and before the last election, we called ourselves the crypto bro and the cat lady, and we'd have these, dialogues that about what was going on, and to hear him talk, he gets his information from what I guess you would call the manosphere, the Joe Rogan. He's a smart guy. He's not in any way an unsophisticated guy. He consumes different information than I do, but he talks about, I was saying, what is it about this? And to hear him say it, he liked that RFK Jr. was talking about cleaning up the food supply. He liked that Trump was committed to not getting us into any more wars. He, yeah, exactly. I mean, it didn't work out, and those people feel betrayed. And I don't, it's not how I
Yeah, that worked
engage. It's
out.
not what I think about as, it's not my mode of civic engagement. But to hear him list the things, you could transplant them on liberals. I mean, we've just thrown the deck of cards up in the air and we're still using these outdated kind of frames for what people care about. And I think that's because, again, we're talking to each other. So, I mean, that would be one example. And my friends that are, you know, on my ideological side can't believe that I am even friends with someone like that. It's not easy. It is not easy. I don't agree most of the time, but we've got to find a way that we're going to be able to live well together and care about one another. And I always say, he didn't rub it in my face when he told me that Joe Biden was too old or that he thought that they were going to swap out Joe Biden for somebody else the summer before the election. I mean, there are all of these ways that we're experiencing this world differently. And so that would be one kind of category of how a young man consumes information, experiences our political world. Um, and then I also look at other people that I know that are uh, one of my parents' good friends, who's I'm incredibly fond of. She's a beautiful, beautiful woman that does incredibly good things with her life. She watches Fox News. And she grew up in a time when you believed the news and you believed the president. And so it makes me go to the way that we keep pushing the responsibility to the voters and not to the people who are in charge. So, of course, the smoker is responsible for smoking, but the person who's making the cigarettes is more responsible. The person that believes the obvious lie is responsible. The person telling the obvious lie is more
Yeah,
responsible. And we just keep participating in this asymmetry that is creating a division that I don't think needs to be there. Mm,
I agree. Let me tell you about my encounters with Trump supporters because I'm afraid they've been uniformly awful. I have tried to listen. I've tried to
mm.
engage.
How
And
does
I've
it
lost
go?
probably a dozen friendships over this, all of them initiated by the other person. Because how it goes basically, I cannot
Wow.
remain
Yeah.
friends with somebody who believes that gays ought to have the same rights as people who are straight. I can't
Mm.
tolerate the fact that you believe that Kamala Harris should be president of the United States. Um, I can't accept that. How did this one put it? This one was a beauty. Um, I can't accept that
Yeah.
you believe that Donald Trump is not out for the benefit of the country. Donald Trump is our savior. Donald Trump is the person who's going to save this country. And I said, no, he's not. He said, I'm sorry. I can't
Right.
have anything to do with somebody who believes that. They are so hardened in their beliefs, so many of them, that it
Well,
becomes
and I
very hard to
wouldn't
maintain a
maintain a
relationship.
relationship in
I've
those
tried, but they just cut me off.
parameters either. I
And
don't know. Right, right. And I would too,
but that's the that's
because
that's the straw I drew. People like
I,
that.
how do I put this? I look at it as more of an excavation um, of what's underneath this. Where are we missing each other? And if the reason why we're missing each other is because this person is a proud racist, well, then that conversation is over. But if we're missing each other because we're mostly consuming different kinds of information, then that's a different conversation. So, for example, during the ICE raids earlier this year, um, I read more. I read across the political spectrum. I find consuming right wing media to be extremely illustrative and important, and maybe one of the most valuable things that I do. But I read across the spectrum. And I ran into the neighbor I was just talking about, who's a wonderful neighbor and a good person with whom I disagree, um, but not a horrible person in any way. And he sincerely says to me, why do you think that the Democratic governors or Democratic mayors in Democratic states are not accepting help getting rid of violent criminals? It was a very sincere question, you know, that I was able to sincerely answer. And we couldn't do that if there wasn't a dialogue and a friendship, you know, and it goes both ways. I don't try to persuade him. He doesn't try to
The dialogue.
persuade me.
Yeah.
We listen to each other's points of view and leave it at that. Because I don't think it's realistic to think that in the same way that he'll never get me to come around on certain views that he has because I'm a different human being. I don't expect that that's going to happen with him, but I do think that we have common ground and common purpose, and that we're both frustrated with the system. We certainly both agree that the DNC is a disaster, you know. And you hear from him things like he's an independent, he's not a Republican. He said, Joe Rogan supported Bernie Sanders. There's, and that's true. I mean, some of these people are not durable right wing voters at all. They're, yeah, they want change. They're sick of the system. And until we get that on our
Change.
side
They want change.
and don't
Yeah.
just, move to this reflex that they're stupid or they're uneducated or they're whatever, then we're going to keep having people like Spencer Pratt make a legitimate run for mayor as this Republican clown in LA, I mean, that's going to keep happening. And that is not, we have to own our side of the street on that kind of thing.
Yeah. I agree. Let's close with civic education. We both agree that it's important. I think most people would. What do
Yeah,
you
I
think we
really
need to do to
appreciated,
create
you
a more
wrote
civic
about this
literacy in this
recently, and
country?
I
And where do
really
you think we lost
appreciated
our way?
what you were saying that the purpose of public education initially was to create better citizens. It wasn't to create better cogs for the machine, for lack of a better way to put it.
Mhm.
And that would be one of the ways that we lost our way. I don't know if you remember that. Do you remember that program they used to have called We the People, where kids would compete? Yeah. Did we ever able to do that? Here in Colorado, when I
Yes.
worked for Congress, I would get to
Yes.
be a judge for that. And for people that don't know, high school kids would compete on their knowledge of the Constitution, and they would debate sides of different constitutional issues and leader. Yeah, I mean, but that was a value that we had, and we just kind of eroded that and
Those were the days. You
undercut
don't see
that.
that anymore.
So I think like the shift towards education is just for the purpose of creating workers was part of it. Um, and I also think that as we look at it now, you've given this a lot more robust thought than I have. But I think we need to not make civic education feel so much like a history lesson. It feels like we're still talking about it in terms of how a bill becomes a law.
Yeah.
And it needs to be more relevant. It needs to be, what role did the government play in creating Tesla? How is it? What is the law that allows somebody who is able to take their stock profits and live off of those, get taxed at 15%, and somebody who's working gets taxed at twice that? We have to have the ways that those things are relevant. And you hear people say all the time that they don't think people want to engage. And I was joking, if you don't think people want to engage, watch what happens when there's an HOA assessment. You'll see that community engaged immediately. We just have to make those things more relevant. And that's what I think. But I mean,
Yep.
you've given this a ton of thought. So what do you think? Mm,
What I think is that you need to teach the fundamentals too. We have people that don't understand anything about the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Civil War, what the causes were, what the role of slavery was.
yeah.
The red states have
Mm,
purposely eliminated all of that education because, frankly, they want to keep people
yeah.
dumb. Because dumb people make dumb voters, and dumb
Mm.
voters choose Republicans. That's how they view it. And so far, they've been
Yeah.
proven
And a
right
lot of rich people voted for him too. A lot
because
of
a lot
very
of dumb people
educated.
voted for Trump.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just the reality. Oh yeah, that's a separate category.
Right.
They voted their self-interest, and they deserve a special place in hell for that, as far as I'm concerned. But as far as civics education goes,
Mm,
we need to do what you described, but we need to teach the fundamentals
yeah.
too. But we need to find a way to teach them in a more exciting fashion, because the way they were taught before was
Right.
dry as dust. But I think STEM education has done a lot of damage because you're right. We're educating workers. We're not educating citizens.
Yeah.
These people come out and they're ready to take jobs in science and math that aren't there, to be honest with you. Every survey I've shown says those jobs just aren't there. And so we've taught people to prepare for jobs that aren't there. Meanwhile, they're living in a civic starved environment where they don't understand the fundamentals of the country, how it's run,
Yeah.
where it's failed, where it's succeeded, what's needed to be a good citizen. All of that stuff's important. And so I don't know how you divide it up, whether you teach some of it in history, teach some of it in
Yeah.
civics,
Well, and you
teach some
also
of it
mentioned something
in
in the piece you recently wrote that I
social
think is
studies,
really
but find a way to do
important.
it.
And again, with that asymmetry that we have where we're pushing the responsibility on the citizens where it belongs, but it needs to be not outsized compared to the people in power, is that I think about how engaged I am, how much energy I have for politics. It's a area of expertise, a professional competency, and it's still hard to figure out what's going on, And so we need to have a way for people to evaluate information, for people to able to think critically. And I think one of the most important things we can do in civic education is teach people how to have hard conversations about differences and how to hold differences. And if I had to say the one thing that I think has gotten us just careening off a cliff in this country, it is the shift from focusing on how we solve our problems to focusing on how we win elections. Of course, it's important that you win an election, but look at where the energy goes. It doesn't go toward how are we actually going to, address the terrifying wealth disparities in this country. It goes to how are we going to elect Democrats to do that or Republicans to make sure that doesn't happen. And if we don't show that once people are in power, they actually can do those things, then I don't think people, I don't think it's irrational for people to think it doesn't matter. I don't think so. I think this has just been so wonderful. I mean,
Great.
my one final
Any final
thought is
thoughts?
I'm very grateful to actually meet you virtually here, and this has been awesome. Yeah.
Pleasure's mine. This has been a lot of fun. I think we covered a lot of ground, and I think a lot of it should be interesting. This has been America's Fractured Politics.